everyone. So nice to have everybody here together. For those who are just joining us online, thank you for joining us for the fifth in a series hosted by the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation that brings together, features, and celebrates incredible civil society leaders who are leading us in a time of incredible transition. A world in which technology is creating new stories, potentially new vulnerabilities, new opportunities, and through it all, new stories not just about tech, but about the people, the communities, their needs, aspirations, their creative vision of a new future. And we know that we can't talk about this new future without grounding ourselves in stories today, in stories that matter because of how we are engaging, how we are bringing forward new generations, how we're supporting the basic institutions of a civil society. And so that's why the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, a 21st century philanthropy that focuses on AI and data science, but more broadly, the interventions that we need in order to create a thriving, a sustainable, and equitable future for everyone, is so committed to working in close partnership with leaders. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by two people that I think of not just as visionaries, but also as dear friends. Over the course of our conversation, I'm going to share a little bit about their work, but really invite them to step into our conversation to share what you both are seeing as you work with communities across the world. For purposes of today's chat, I'll invite our audience to continue to think about questions, to engage in the chat box that's to the side. And hopefully at the end of our conversation today, we'll have a little bit of time to come back and talk about it. But let me jump right in by introducing our two great guests. First, Dr. Brandon Nicholson. Brandon, we've known each other for years. In that time, I've seen the incredible work you've done as the CEO of the Hidden Genius Project. It's a nonprofit organization that trains and mentors Black male youth in technology creation, in entrepreneurship and leadership skills to transform lives and communities. I've known you as a dedicated champion for equity in the public realm, particularly thinking about education, where you had extensive experience as a senior evaluator, as a consultant. You've worked on research, evaluation, and consultation on all kinds of work at the intersection of ed policy and workforce development. And I've seen you talk about the work where you realize the potential for technology to bolster economic growth, Black and high potential populations to have more equitable access. And you've also worked on significant research in the areas of education and youth development. Today, I'm excited for you to bring those stories to celebrate the incredible accomplishments of young Black men here in the United States as you help them figure out new pathways to finding and demanding economic access and equity. And we have with us Jonah Edelman. Jonah, you have been the co-founder and executive officer of an incredible organization called Stand for Children. You focused on catalyzing educational equity and racial justice by helping children at the bottom of the economic ladder rise up through effective dropout prevention strategies, through expanded career technical education, through college prep, through post-secondary guidance. You've been a champion and you've led efforts to increase access to quality early childhood education, to making sure that all kids have improved literacy instruction and interventions, funding equity and adequacy, and making sure that schools are living up to their responsibility to provide quality for communities, with a concentration on particularly chronically low-performing schools. You've shared, and I hope you'll share in our conversation a little bit of the personal story that's brought you here, but I specifically think of the time during college where you've taught a bilingual child how to read, founded mentorship programs, served as administrator of an enrichment program, and done so much more. And for those who may not know me, my name is Vilas Dhar. I'm the president of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. I spent my life at the intersection of technology and systems of law, and now working with incredible civil society leaders like the ones we have here. And what I will say to you is, I think at the end of the day, these are not conversations that we should be having in silos about technology or about education policy or about youth access. They require us to bring our full and holistic approach, a whole heart and a mechanism to say, how do we actually work together to define and create a shared future that works for all of us? Look, AI is always in the news headlines these days. We think about it as an aperture that's not just about tech. It's not just about being optimistic about the ways that AI is going to change our lives. It's actually much more. It's often a way for us to examine some fundamental assumptions about the societies we live in, about why our economic structures, our social structures are set up the way they are, and why in some cases we're okay with the bias, the inadequacy of these systems. They give us a new frame of reference that go back and actually talk about an invention, not a reinvention, of the kind of society we live in. And to do that requires us to start from a place of acknowledging and celebrating the incredible successes that are being driven by communities and individuals across the planet. Through today's conversation, I think we'll talk a lot about things like the importance of broad-based literacy, both digital and otherwise, the mechanisms of empowerment and role models that we see coming out of communities. And we're going to talk about aspirations, not just for individuals or communities, but for humanity as a whole. And with that, let's dive directly into the conversation. And Brandon, I'm going to ask you to start us off. I'd love for you to share a little bit about the Hidden Genius Project, a little of its history, and the purpose and vision with which you've led the organization. Brandon, over to you.
Thank you, Vilas. I appreciate it. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. The Hidden Genius Project was founded in 2012 to train and mentor Black male youth in technology creation, entrepreneurship, and leadership skills to transform their lives and communities. We were founded really with the intent to inspire young people, particularly Black boys and young men, to lead in their communities, hopefully be able to thrive in their communities by way of being able to develop meaningful career pathways, but also develop as entrepreneurs and people who can effectively lead the development and creation of the solutions to some of their communities and society's greatest challenges. And of course, just leverage their brilliance as our society's greatest assets. And so in so doing, we opted to focus on technology, computer science, and now, even more broadly, just the technology of, I think, innovation and of problem solving, as well as entrepreneurship from the standpoint of not just owning one's own business, but thinking entrepreneurially, thinking critically, thinking forward, and also not needing to wait on a sea change among some of the largest hiring entities, employers, be it in Silicon Valley or anywhere else in the world, especially at a time when we were founded, where there is great attention and conversation around data related to composition and diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera. So we were so fortunate over this time period to have served over 11,000 young people, really across many backgrounds. But our most proudest achievement is with our intensive immersion program, with the alumni who've graduated high school at nearly 100% clip, but also who continue to lead in their communities in any number of ways, whether they go on to university, go into employment, entrepreneurship, all of the above. But they have a sense of purpose and a sense of commitment to understanding that they are going to manifest the best of what our society has to offer going forward. So they have a certain level of responsibility. We see that every day. We have several now young people, dozens who work with us part-time on our payroll, and a number who work with us full-time in different capacities, including as educators. So we're just extremely proud of them paying it forward. And we really believe a rising tide lifts all boats, and we get to see that every day.
Brendan, it's an incredible story. And as I speak with you and I speak with some of the young men who've gone through the program, I'm always filled with this incredible sense of hope. But also, it's a validation of this idea of agency in communities, right? That this isn't about looking to external resources. It's about setting up young men to know that their path is theirs to create. I wonder if you could share a little bit, I've had a chance to visit with you in Oakland. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the program there and also what your amazing moment in time as you're expanding nationally looks like for Hidden Genius Project.
Absolutely. So we are headquartered here in Oakland, California, and also operating in Richmond, California, Los Angeles, Detroit, Atlanta, Chicago, and launching in Baltimore this year. And of course, we've been extremely fortunate to program in multiple countries, including the United Kingdom multiple times and South Africa as well, and continue to build partnerships therein. Of course, we started here as a volunteer organization in 2012 in Oakland at a time when we were seeing another kind of gold rush push, if you will, a tech gold rush around in and around Silicon Valley, but that was extending into the Oaklands of the world, and saw so many young people here, especially our Black boys and young men, who were very much brilliant, capable, enthusiastic, funny, great to be around, maybe did not have all the access to the opportunities, the networks, the pathways that could help them leverage all these fundamental traits, and even a certain level of facility with and fluency around technology as well. But they didn't have necessarily all the opportunities to put them together. and figure out then how to bring their visions to bear, and then have that be able to help them thrive and sustain in the communities where they might live now or where they may dream to live someday. And so for us, it was just about jumping right in, both feet and our both hands, and wrapping our arms around these young people to try and give them what they need to achieve their dreams. So we're as much a holistic youth development program as anything else, really here to provide a safe space and an ongoing and steady support for these young men, not just for their core program. Our fundamental program is a 15-month intensive immersion program for young men in high school, and it's cohort based. But we have made deep investments, and thanks in part to the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation and others, in our alumni support, and that's allowed us to grow. And then as we do that, that's actually extended our own capacity, because now our young men, our alumni, are culture keepers. They're the innovators. They're the ones actually keeping us honest and advancing our work as the Hidden Genius Project, but also wherever they might be in the community. And so in Oakland, that's where we have had the most cohorts. We're welcoming, I believe, our 14th and 15th ever this year, which is exciting. But we're just extremely proud to be able to serve hundreds of young people, and really in Oakland, and we think we can do even more there, and then thousands nationally around the world every year. And we're trying to continue to build, but we have to do so collaboratively. So it's really about making sure that every community in which we operate, that we are of that community, that community feels as though it's their program, and that we can link arms with all the efforts taking place to inspire and empower young people wherever they might be.
So, Brandon, we're going to zoom out and talk about some of the thematic learnings. But before we go there, I have to ask you one more question. You teach young men how to be entrepreneurial. You are a visionary and academic, a leader, and yet you're also an incredible entrepreneur. Even as you listed off the number of cities that you are now in, to me, I've seen how hard you've worked to get there and all the steps in between. Share with us a little bit of your story. Like, where did you find this kind of desire and tactical skill set to go out and grow an organization like this?
Well, I was extremely fortunate to have this opportunity. I'm an alum of the Ron Brown Scholar Program, a tremendous scholarship program for young people of African descent entering undergraduate education that's been around now pushing towards 30 years, but named for the late Ronald H. Brown, the Secretary of Commerce under the Bill Clinton administration. And so I happened to meet two tremendous colleagues there back when I was just getting into the program, Jason William Young and Tracy Timore II. They were best friends at Harvard 2 years apart. I was the year sandwiched between them. And they were from different parts of the country, but came out to Oakland to build an organization, a for-profit gaming company focused on social impact, and said, we want to pay it forward. And they knew I was from Oakland, California, had a background in education policy, and asked me how I could support. It was a volunteer-driven organization for the first 2.5 years. I never dreamed of being a formal entrepreneur or even running a social impact organization or nonprofit, whatever it might be. The Hidden Genius Project's mission and opportunity and potential was so great that it certainly drew me in. But to be very honest, to keep it 100, as they say, also I got a no from everywhere else. Every time I applied for any other job in Impact, I got a no, early, late, in the middle, final stage, phone screen. Nobody was interested. So as we're starting here with very little infrastructure, next to none, and no resources or budget or no business even doing this, because we had no idea what we were doing, it was an opportunity to make something happen and take a bet. Certainly on myself, but most importantly, take a bet on what impact we could develop for young people in Oakland. But we knew that over time, we'd love to be reaching young people across the diaspora, literally across the world in different ways. And so I jump out of bed every day, every morning, to be able to take on that challenge. And it's one of the best things that's happened to me outside of, my wife and, my son. But, it was in many ways a very happy accident. That I'm glad that I was so unsuccessful in every other aspect that it forced my hand. But it's been a great run.
Brandon, thanks so much for sharing. Inspirational throughout, but something you said that was quite poignant, and I think, Jonah, you probably share in this as well, was the sense that both of you have taken bets, not just on yourselves, but also on the communities that you want to serve, to know that with the right tools, they can go out and progress them. And it's something that we should name, because it is a differentiator from being an entrepreneur in the private sector, where you're taking a bet on yourself right, for public and financial gain. And there's something quite special about doing civil society. Jonah, it's a perfect segue. You've had this incredible legacy. I alluded to it in speaking a little bit about your bio. Tell us a bit about Stand for Children. Tell us about your path, and tell us about some exciting partnerships that you have ahead.
Thanks, Vilas. It's great to be with you. Brandon, so greatly respect your work. I loved hearing your story. And Vilas, I love the way you lead, the level of entrepreneurship and encouragement. The genuine encouragement and field leadership that you provide is fantastic and fairly rare in philanthropy. So thank you for that. So I've been at this for quite a long time. Stand for Children was founded in 1996 in a pretty unique way. We had a rally of 300,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And I wasn't planning on getting into this field. I was just finishing a doctorate. And my mother, who's a iconic civil rights leader at the time running the Children's Defense Fund, asked me to organize this rally. And it sounded like the thing that I missed out on as a kid, hearing stories about the civil rights movement. So I signed up for that, and it turned into my career. And I'll just say, by way of linking up with Brandon's story, and in general, the values I think that everyone who's participating in this forum shares, none of us get here on our own. And I wouldn't have chosen this path without the example of my mother, my parents, other relatives. And then I wouldn't have been able to learn and fail and, regroup, get up, improve so many times without wonderful mentors. And so I would just say, in general, and now at 27 years in, it's fun to be able to give back and do the same thing for other leaders. But Stand for Children is a unique catalyst, as you alluded to in the intro, for educational equity and racial justice. We pull multiple levers to achieve impact. We started off doing grassroots organizing, and I did that full time. And that was a joy. Evolved into advocacy, elections, and now we have programs. And so I would also emphasize to our audience that one of the great parts of leadership in the nonprofit space is the ability to evolve, the ability to innovate and change over time. Our North Star has always been to achieve the greatest impact that we can with the resources we are blessed to have. But how we do that has continued to evolve, which has made it interesting, and it's why I'm still at it. So our focus is on education primarily. You alluded to some of the key focused areas. We're looking at ways that we can impact a large number of children meaningfully, and that's by looking at the evidence. It's also at looking at practical considerations regarding achievability. And so that's why we focus a lot on high school success, particularly that make or break ninth grade year. And we do that through policy in significant ways, securing investments from state legislatures, but also through our Center for High School Success, which now supports 179 high schools across 9 states in lifting their ninth grade on track rates. When a student finishes ninth grade on track to graduate with no more than 1 semester course failure, they're 3 times more likely to graduate. And we were able, thanks to the great leadership and example of the Network for College Success in Chicago, to do that consistently with the high schools with which we work. It's also why we focus so much on early literacy. It's a key juncture. You alluded to my start. The first thing I did as a volunteer when I was an extremely self-involved first-year college student who felt guilty that my friend was volunteering and I wasn't. I went and volunteered in an elementary school near the Yale campus, and I got to tutor this wonderful pudgy little kid named Daniel Zayas, who was struggling to read. I didn't know what I was doing, but that he had a good teacher, and she told me kind of what to do with him, and I just basically got to know him and read with him. Funny, fast forward, that now we have a Center for Early Literacy Success at Stand for Children. It's led by an internationally renowned researcher, an expert, Dr. Nell Duke. And a few months ago, in late summer, Amira Learning, which is the leading early literacy tutoring program in the country. It's AI-powered, personalized tutoring, having tremendous impact on more than 1.5 million children in the U.S. And also across the world, reached out to Dr. Duke and asked her if she would be willing to do a review, top to bottom, to help them figure out how to increase their impact. What an incredible example of leadership for the leading program to have that drive. They're already having greater effect sizes than any of their peers by far. They're already, in some cases, surpassing the impact of human tutors, but they wanted to get better, particularly in the area of reading comprehension. And so Dr. Duke did that review. She came up with 18 recommendations to help them improve. And I think maybe some of the folks watching, I know you, Vilas, and you, Brandon, know when you're a tech company and you're met with a bunch of suggestions about how to change your tech roadmap, that's usually about the last thing you want to hear. To their credit, Mark Angel, the CEO, Adam Porst, the COO, Ran Liu, the chief AI scientist, were enthusiastic to implement the recommendations. And so we've developed a partnership where Stanford Children is providing a grant to Amira Learning. So maybe a little out of the box, a nonprofit providing a for-profit with a grant. Yes, because this is a way to drive impact, to implement those recommendations. And we're also fortunate to be able to distribute a host of licenses for Amira to help kids directly learn that will hopefully catalyze even more use. So I'll stop there because there's a lot of ways we can go from there. But I'm really excited about AI. I honestly didn't know anything about it other than, kind of what I would read. And I thought, okay, I mean, this is coming, autonomous cars and all that. But I've now become, really excited about the possibilities of technology not exacerbating the divides that exist and the massive chasm in terms of early literacy proficiency, specifically between, kids who grew up in privileged circumstances and those from, situations where they have less resources, to actually, narrow those divides, to actually bend the arc. And I'm happy to talk more about that.
Amazing, Jonah. Thank you for sharing. I heard a few different pieces there, and I want to come back to you to expand a little bit. There is a piece around policy frameworks, around recognizing the ways that an organization like yours can step in and change and transform curricular pathways and educational pathways for kids at scale. And then you also gave us a very tactical intervention, right? Thinking about AI-based learning or tutoring that's really at, how do we specifically intervene with single kind of individuals? Tell us a little bit about how you balance those different interventions. Like, where do you think about spending time? How do you balance the large-scale impact of policy versus the direct individual impact of a single intervention?
It's an incredible question. I'll try to be cogent. One of the challenges of advocacy at a policy level, or leading at a policy level, is the distance that often exists between the policymakers and the practitioners. And to the extent that the policymakers or the advocates can be informed and guided by leading practitioners, I believe is the increases massively the likelihood of policymakers getting it right, or advocates advocating for what will really work. And I'll say we learned a lot of lessons along the way, had a lot of failure along the way, and a lot of humility. But got to the point where it was clear to me that we had tremendous facility in terms of advocacy and politics, elections. But we needed to be guided more directly by those leading practitioners like Dr. Duke or Sarah Duncan from the Network for College Success at the time. And I think the magic has come where we really have increased our impact markedly in the last 8 years by marrying the two. And so, but it takes that humility and realizing, okay, and proximity, and listening to people who are the best at doing it directly, and then being able to translate in dialogue with them. Okay, so if these are the things that are working best to accelerate learning for kids furthest from opportunity, what kind of policy changes or what kind of investment streams could actually facilitate you doing that more of the time? Knowing of all the challenges that exist, in local school districts or other forms of governance, it's that, ability to conceptualize a policy proposal or a budget proposal that could actually truly add value at a classroom level, at a school level. Now, where does a program like Amira come in? It's really interesting. I mean, because, or other programs directly. Brandon's program is another example, but it's, out of school, it's in the community. So you think about, what could be enabling from a policy standpoint and investment standpoint in this new realm. And so, I think a lot of this can happen just based on districts realizing, and many districts do, by the way, to their credit, the huge opportunity that exists and the huge need that exists to leverage programs like Amira. Because every day there are teachers, here's the use case, here's the situation. teachers have anywhere from 20 to 30 kids in their class, or maybe even a little bit more, sadly, in K to 5, K to 6. And so they're only able to provide, small group instruction to a small number of kids during the course of the day. Oftentimes it's really hard because you have a huge range of proficiency in one classroom. And so how can a teacher actually meet kids where they are and help all kids grow? It's impossible. So they narrow down and they're trying to differentiate, well, what's happening for all the other kids at that point? That is the huge opportunity where Amira Learning has had such a massive impact, enabling personalized tutoring to children that really learns and listens to them and then responds to them in terms of the ways in which the software directs the child in an encouraging fashion, and then reports to the teacher on the kid's progress. That's truly an accelerator. It's not a replacement. It's an accelerator. It's an enhancement. And I think there needs to be more of that mindset. So I would just say that I'm giving a specific example to a general question, but in general, I think it takes an orientation toward, being focused on the end in mind, and then crafting policies, and then sticking with them past passage through implementation, and not feeling like you're done when you pass it, and then also going back and continually improving to see the impact at scale.
We have an internal framework here at the foundation that, particularly in a technology lens, but in many of these moments of social change, take us from the idea that we have to start from pilots. We have to understand community needs. We have to try and deploy interventions. But pilots are never the end point, right? Pilots have to move into products. Products have to become platforms. Platforms have to inform policy. And somewhere through there, we lead to structural change. As I think about the ways that you both have shared the narratives of your organizations, I think there's something that I think, Jonah, you used one of my favorite words, the word of proximity. The idea that sometimes policy happens very far away from where the front line of vulnerability is. And practitioner civil society organizations, those who are building programs, are the ones that are most proximate to community needs. We see this expressed certainly in the world of AI, but I don't want to go too deep into that specific world. Across everything that we've talked about here, the idea that often those who are contributing and most effective at delivering local solutions are not necessarily the ones that are named in the public discourse as the ones who are leading, right? We've seen it recently, and we've seen it for decades through the contributions of underrepresented or marginalized populations that are never actually the ones that are brought into the heart of the people who are changing the system. And yet, in both of your stories, there's something much more foundational and fundamental. There are people who are truly the champions of these kinds of changes. Brandon, I'd love to hear from you some stories about both the young men who are going through the programs you've created, but also the people on your team that are coming with real innovation and creativity and celebrating the potential here, driven by their lived experience and by their communities. Tell us a bit more about these folks.
Absolutely. Well, I think, I appreciate you elevating the question and the concept. A lot of it starts just with our PR, right? And that's why it's so critical for us to talk about our work at the Hidden Genius Project as asset in an assets-based framework, and really talk about the potential, the promise, and the agency our young people, and even to your point, our team members, our community exercise on a daily basis. The reason why is because if we view or discuss the young people we work with, the people we serve, the communities we serve from a deficit-based framework, or even from the lens of someone else, then it's easy then to lose that story, as you mentioned, right? So if we talk about our young people as underrepresented and marginalized, then the assumption is that the solution they require is from someone who's represented or not in the margins, right? But in reality, these same young people, have been effectively leading the world in early adoption of new technology and content creation, as we understand in social, and willingness to share and teach other young people technology. These are all cited in the regular reports that Nicholson completes, right? Particularly around Black youth in tech. And so when we began engaging our young people around AI, they're already thinking about it all the time. A lot of times people assume we're doing this work because there's a gap and we need to reach all the way back and bring these young people along to get them caught up to whatever the mainstream standard is. In reality, they're engaging with this stuff all the time. The data actually suggests that they're engaging with it more than other groups, just in different ways. And they don't always have the access or the opportunities to say, build it or to sell it, or sometimes they have a tremendous idea that by way of, say, social media, they'll give up for free. It'll be sold back to them by someone with the access and positioning to do so, right? Who takes that idea and puts a package on it and then sells it right back to our community. So when you just look at day to day what our young people do, how they show up, they're already inspiring us because they're thinking critically. One of the most fascinating conversations when we introduced the next round of our AI track last summer, it was in Oakland and also in Los Angeles. But we had young people who the entire first week is basically on the fundamentals of AI as it pertains to ethics and use cases, and also understanding the kind of social implications, right? So before anybody got to put their hand on the keyboard, right, it's all about just understanding what are the various uses we're seeing, what's positive or healthy utilization of the technology, what are things you have to watch out for. And young people were already jumping on bots, right? That in their culture in particular, the concept of the bot looms large. They're exhibiting this tremendous and fantastic and under-celebrated critical thinking, right? Where they're saying, yes, we're already thinking at any point in time, is this real or is it generated by technology in some way, shape, or form? Something is obviously as extensive as a deep fake video, right, on the more comprehensive side, all the way down to just, does that post from Twitter or X, does that post from Instagram or Snap, whatever, come from a person? Does that comment come from a person? And how do you understand the implications? What's fascinating about that, when you think about with Black youth and the young people we work with in particular, they've been navigating the space since I was a young person, since my grandfather was a young person, whomever it might be. They've been having to think critically about, where can we step? Is this meant for me? Is this real? Is this, sincere, whatever it might be? So they're thinking, they're navigating the world in a highly critically thinking way. Simultaneously, we have all sorts of data about the African diaspora, be it in the U.S. and elsewhere, but certainly in the U.S., leading the world in pop culture, especially youth culture, right? And what we listen to, how we talk, what we wear, et cetera, et cetera. Those young people, that is very much rooted in the same critical analysis that you use to figure out whether something's artificially generated or not. That's why young people move trends so quickly. The kind of old school equivalent to the bot is just my parents or my grandparents saying or doing it, right? Like, and it may not even get that far. It may just be people from the next school or the next neighborhood. Once they say or to do it, then we've got to find something else because it's being reproduced in a way that doesn't feel authentic to our experience. So they're grasping that not all the time. And then what we started to see was in young people, their particular assignment last year was, how do you manufacture and produce, a better, effectively, generative search or chat tool, right, that reflects your needs and interests. And it was just fascinating to see what they would come up with, because they understand that there's Chat GPT and Bard and other tools. And so it was like, what are your other use cases based on what we've discussed? And a lot of them were thinking about, how to better do their homework or how to start a business or whatever. But some of them are thinking about how to use that technology to find safe places to play or to, describe how to access resources like food if you live in a food desert. So their mindset coming in is already highly engaged and enthusiastic. And then you look at so many of our team members, many of whom are, again, our alumni and young people themselves. But so many of our staff are, working every day to build tools that will help us deliver better learning. So now we actually have our own technically, kind of AI supported chatbot that carries all our information for the Hidden Genius Project that's developed by team members on our own team. And that's been very cool to see. Just, again, it's all about inspiring, because when our young people see their educators or their mentors working on this stuff, or when our mentors are asking for their opinion or for them to test it out, or for them to inform the next phase of it, right? That's very much modeling and mirroring this collaborative process. And the last piece, just to close the loop on the PR point, I think is one thing I think I really want to embrace around AI is AI's PR campaign, right? It's a developing, emerging, and growing space with a lot of exciting stuff going on. Tons of flaws, tons of terrifying and scary things, tons of things that make people shudder or worse. And yet we keep throwing money investing into it, and we don't tell the story only about all the bad things happening. We actually hype up the great thing and say, imagine the possibilities. Imagine if we talked about our Black boys and young men the exact same way, right? They're not, it's not as a function of a gap or where they are relative to China or, white, male high school students of whatever, socioeconomic status and all these things. If you just talked about the possibilities and you kept telling those stories, and you say, yeah, we'll figure the other stuff out, that's a heck of a way to be able to move around and live life. So we want to be on that same PR plane for sure.
Brandon, I love that. The idea that in order to tell an inspiring and positive story, you don't have to start from a negative one, that these accomplishments stand alone, that the work that these young men are doing, that communities around the world are doing, are worth celebrating just because of their own merits and virtues. Absolutely incredible. And I want to come back to you with a very quick follow-up. You said two things there that just both started new threads of thought for me. We should follow up on them after this call. The first, this idea that maybe inherently in the response to the social structures in which these young men have grown up, they actually have an increased ability to search for and validate authenticity. That because they have
100%.
a need for critical evaluation. I find that's so compelling. And I don't know if you want to expand on that thought a little bit. It seems like it actually gives us a ray of hope as we think about a world with misinformation and disinformation, that you actually have this innate community reservoir of a capacity to look through some of that and look for authenticity in information. Does that resonate for you?
That beyond resonates for me. Sometimes I try to avoid speaking to that point, not because it doesn't
We're keeping
resonate,
it
but
on
really
leader,
because
Brandon, as you said. Please, let's go into it.
absolutely. Well, because I could talk about it forever, but no, I think there's I think two major themes within what you highlighted. One being that when we think about just what artificial intelligence, machine learning are meant to do, they're meant to engage large language models, learning models, extremely large data sets beyond even comprehension, right? But the challenge is we see when we see these flaws and glitches and hallucinations and all these things. When we read about the actual technology, it typically tracks back to concerns around the shallowness of the pool of data, right? So now you're trying to connect more pieces than you can actually get to. Now, part of that may come from the fact that to begin to teach the model to learn and build, much of the teaching is still anchoring from a shallow pool of designers, right? And so when you think about what would it look like to have a model, right? When we talk about sentience or representation or universal application, whatever it might be, and you look at these different indexes of how human is this model, all these things. Well, there's a lot of humans last time I checked on this earth, right? So to represent those experiences, the way 8 billion humans experience certain things. So a great example for me, I talk to people about is grandmother. It makes sense to ask ChatGPT or Bard, for example, what to get my grandmother for my birthday. But what the heck is a grandmother other than the mother of your mother but then in many cultures, a grandmother may not just be the mother of your mother, right? And you may call your grandmother Nana, Big Mama, Abuela, Abuelita. You may call her by her first name, just her last name. Some of us in many cultures, if you look at the South in the US or the South in other countries, some of us grew up not being allowed in our grandmother's living room. Some of us are deathly afraid of slamming our grandmother's screen door. So that's a different grandmother from the one that maybe you might Google right now on Google Images and say, picture your grandmother. Last time I did that, it didn't look like the grandmother that had me very concerned about speaking up during Thanksgiving at the big table, right? And it wasn't the same grandmother who navigated, deep, staunch racism in the state of Florida growing up in Tampa, such that she literally got paid to do her master's in social work in the state of Georgia by the state of Florida because the policy was hoping to reduce the number of master's degrees attained in the state of Georgia, or state of Florida, excuse me, as a Florida native. So what you get her for her birthday and for Christmas is different from what you get a different grandmother, right? But no GPT is going to capture that because it's not just going to be scraped off X and off the first 5 results from a Google search. It's going to take an expansion of thinking about different experiences. And yeah, we have different grandmothers. We call them different things. And there are some people are fictive kin, right? So when you think about that, the experiences our young people bring, that means they're a subject matter expert. There's no PhD on earth who's going to be able to get to their experience or even their immediate community's experience unless those people also come from that experience. So that positions them in a really exciting way. And then, that other part of it is just understanding that there's so much that can, go wrong, we understand. But the exciting parts about what can go right have to be informed by the people who are going to make greater use of this. When we look at the African continent, the 54, I think 55 now nations there, boast the youngest workforce population, the youngest age, the lowest median age in the world, and the fastest growing youth population. So that means that they're going to be driving a lot of what happens for all of us in the next 20 to 30 years. So you're going to have to involve people from that entire continent, right? And shaping that future, because everyone else is almost going to be too old to do it in so many countries, right? So we have to rethink the way we engage with populations.
Brandon, to this day, I still close screen doors quietly because of remembering my grandmother in rural India telling me to do that. It's funny how universal that is for all of us. There is so much there. Jonah, you are somebody I think of as an expert, not just on the educational literacy pieces, but in thinking about power and construction and how we actually shift and build capacity for communities to have voice. I want to ask you about a whole bunch of things. If you want to go, I'd love to hear about how you think about representation and technology and some of the work that you've done around homogeneity and addressing it head on. I'd love for you to talk about how we think about making sure that communities have voice and power in these conversations more broadly. And before I hand it to you, I'll encourage our listeners. We have a little bit of time for questions as well, so please keep those coming. We'll try to get to a couple of them too. But Jonah, over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question in the chat. I want to respond directly to it. Vilas and I have partnered on a project that is directly responding to the challenge that you posed. And it's not just in the tech sector. In 2020, following George Floyd's murder, I worked with John Rice, who's a very, very old friend and the CEO of Management Leadership for Tomorrow, which is the leading partner related to racial equity for companies for the private sector in this country, to develop the Racial Equity at Work certification program, which provides a comprehensive standard for assessing companies' progress on their journey toward Black equity and Hispanic equity, and then provides an in-depth support system to enable companies to make meaningful annual improvements, based on that assessment toward the standard for certification. We have 60 companies participating, and I would call out one that is in the tech sector that has been phenomenal to work with, NerdWallet, which is in the Bay Area. They've just been fantastic as a partner, and I think illustrative of what is possible. When you embrace the opportunity to bring in a range of people from different experiences with different talents, with different perspectives, many of the sort that Brandon has talked about, they've been wonderful to work with. They have become Black Equity at Work certified, and they just have an orientation that's proactive and positive and opportunity oriented, which shows that it's possible. Our goal with the Racial Equity at Work certification program is to provide the standard for racial equity and a mechanism to enable improvement at scale. And obviously, it's a much, much tougher environment now than it was when we formed the program. It's a very, very difficult context. But we are continuing to see companies make significant headway regardless. And so I hope that, there's my view of this is that there's ebbs and flows. There's always ebbs and flows in this whole, there's a pendulum that kind of swings back and forth. But regardless of that, if you're purposeful, if you're strategic, if you're persistent, you can make headway.
There we go. Thanks, Jonah. That's super exciting. And I've loved partnering with you, with MLT on this work to really create that environment, that ecosystem. It's been phenomenal. I think a question that's come in also on the chat, but I want to come back to you, Brandon. How do we think about the difference between training people to be able to take jobs in the existing tech sector and a much more expansive vision that I've heard both of you speak about empowering individuals to take on kind of what their creating aspiration takes them to with technical skills? What does that mean from a curriculum perspective, a program perspective?
Absolutely. The most important thing for us, particularly at the Hidden Genius Project, is to anchor and center on our young people's dreams and passions. Because as it turns out, all of those are going to involve AI regardless, right? In our community, many people, and this was a driver of my doctoral work back in the day, because I get frustrated. People would talk about, perception around a disproportionate interest among Black boys and young men in professional sports careers. And some people say, well, that's just maybe because all they see or what have you, but they should aspire to do more. My pushback was nobody loves more sports more than the world. That's why you have the Olympics, the World Cup, and every other sport, right? There's no disproportionate interest in sport, right? There's just disproportionate access to opportunities to pursue different pathways that can sustain ourselves, including our dreams. As it turns out, I went to a very expensive prep school in Marin County, thankfully on full financial aid. And I grew up in Oakland, so I commuted every day I went. Nobody said, well, I love sports, but I'm never going to pursue them, right? What they realized was, yeah, I'm short, I'm horrible at basketball, but one day I'm going to be a sports agent. One day I'm going to be a social media director for the NBA. One day I'm going to travel to the World Cup and help finance stadia in the English Premier League, as I'm going to work in Goldman Sachs, but I'm going to stay close to my passions. The same applies to this space, to AI, right? To if I'm a creative, if I'm a cook, there's something that the space is going to help me do, but we have to anchor in what our young people love and what gets them out of bed every day, and then show them different tools that can help them get there, and certainly expand their access and exposure. But it's all about showing just how broad these applications are. We see so much obviously happening around video now, and that's going to have some incredible impacts on film production. That's why we saw the writer's strike, right? And we saw so many strikes in Screen Actors Guild, all these things. But at the same time, I wasn't alive for the time when people were first concerned about the elimination of the elevator operator, right? But people were concerned that automation was going to wipe out jobs. But what I know for a fact was at that time, people were unaware that the VCR manufacturing business was going to be booming in just a short period of time, right? That we'd add many jobs in that regard. Now, the reason why I obviously thought of that example is because now we know the VCR manufacturing business is no longer booming, but we don't wring our hands over that, right? We started moving forward towards DVDs and we got off that, figured out, well, how do we support streaming, et cetera? So we have to continue to utilize our ingenuity. And it can't just be, again, that same limited group. Because I do believe, yes, if we're only thinking about 13 archetypes of designers, builders, modelers, et cetera, they are going to run out of ideas. But what I'm saying is when we engage our population more broadly, and when we find different ways for our own collective benefit to engage their creativity, we're going to see the world in ways we've never seen it before. And that's an extremely exciting thing.
So Brandon, you've shaped for us what this looks like at that sort of space of like somebody figuring out aspiration and professional skills. Jonah, take us back a little bit in the journey. You're an expert on this. What are some of the most promising early childhood interventions that lead to success over the career path?
Over the career path, I mean, obviously early childhood education, high quality early childhood education is the most important foundation for education and life success. Ironically, if you look at the continuum of education from early childhood through graduate school, it gets the least investment, but it's the most seminal developmental period of life. I think everybody, here knows that in terms of brain development. And so, as a country, we have, I think, made progress. There's greater investment from when, my mother was a pioneer in advocating for the creation of Head Start in Mississippi. Early childhood education is definitely much more available. But there was an opportunity for the federal government to take a great leap forward, following during the pandemic, and it did not happen, unfortunately. That being said, steps are being taken. California is making a lot of progress on what they're calling transitional kindergarten, TK, and a lot of states are investing in pre-K. The key thing I would say about it is it has to be done well. So it has to be adequately invested in. The quality of the teaching has to be good. The quality of the curriculum has to be good. And those are huge questions. With regard to literacy itself, a lot of it comes down to things that humans don't tend to want to focus on as much because we're more reactive and intervention oriented. And that is actually preparing teachers to understand how to teach literacy effectively, which they don't tend to learn pre-service, and which most of the existing mechanisms currently for professional development don't help them do. And so quality literacy coaching that aligns with research is really a key to improving early literacy instruction. You cannot intervene your way to helping most kids learn to read. That could be a long one. I'll stop there because we're running out of time.
That's great.
But anyway, appreciate the question.
And I hear your emphasis there, literacy training, supporting teachers to do that better. And then, of course, this increased investment. We're coming to the end of our time together. Let's take that as the segue to our jumping off our last question, my trademark question. And Jonah, I'll start with you to continue the thread there. Tell us what you are most hopeful for as you look at the field in which you are a visionary leader, as you look at what's happening around you. What do we look forward to in 2024 that advances your core cause and our shared intention for a more equitable and just society?
I mean, two things from my organization, not speaking on a societal level. One, that Center for High School Success's work with high schools has laid a tremendous platform. What is the hardest thing to do, and you know this as a grant maker at Vilas, and Brandon as a leader, is to deliver high quality programs at scale. There's very typically a degradation of quality as organizations get bigger, programs get bigger. And there's also a cliff or a wall that nonprofits tend to run into based on our irrational capital structure and not being able to reach real scale. That program has a unique potential to reach scale, and it's delivering consistent impact across an expanding platform of schools. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited about the early literacy potential, both our partnership with Amira Learning and the development of the Great First Aid curriculum, which I'm not going to take the time to describe at length, but I would encourage viewers to look at greatfirstaid.org, which is a comprehensive, culturally responsive, totally research-aligned curriculum for children 0 to 8 that my colleague Nell Duke and a world-class team is developing.
Amazing. Thank you, Jonah. Brandon, to you, what are you hopeful for in the next year? Where are you seeing those real sources of inspiration?
This year it'll be the same as last year and the year before that, our young people, right? Especially because we get to see new ones every year and they're coming in with different skills, different dreams, different aspirations. The most importantly, we're doing work, for example, in October, we were able to finally go back overseas, for the first time since COVID had begun. And we were able to take our young people back to the United Kingdom and connect with a broad array of young people there. And we anticipate being able to return this year, but also visit a couple countries on the African continent and bring young people with us, but also have them facilitate and lead programming in Senegal and in South Africa. And in both those respects, be able to ideate and build together, again, from the standpoint of ultimately identifying the way we can make a way out of no way. Sometimes we have resources, sometimes we don't. The most resilient and inspiring stories oftentimes come from when we didn't have everything lined up, and then we're working every day to try and make sure we can afford more of those resources while navigating what Jonah described, right? That there's this growth and these different kind of bumps along the way that can potentially impede scale or make it much more difficult. But we're here for the challenge, especially because we know what's on the other end. We see every day what happens when these young people get opportunities, when they get asked questions, and then we ask them for the answers, and we don't just hand them the answers, right? The opportunities and the possibilities are endless, and it's, again, not just a moralistic thing. And I love moral arguments. I like to think of my integrity and my kind of moral compass as a great driver of what I do. That having been said, we understand that a lot of this only makes sense when it makes dollars for a lot of people. And that's a great imperative as well. There's a tremendous business imperative to actually expand it. We're at a space, that's why I love the conversation being around AI. AI is only going to go so far as the last person we ask to support it, right? Because that's always going to be the natural limitations of the data we can get to, the way, the structures, the designs, and the applications, especially across different infrastructure, across different realities and material realities. So everybody's got a chance to do this for those folks who really want to have the best tool, the best resource, because they're going to have to leverage the best of what everyone has to offer for it to fit universally and globally.
Amazing. Brandon, Jonah, my answer to the question never changes either. It's almost always the same, which is I get sources of hope from learning from and with leaders like both of you, like the many others out there that are supporting communities to take ownership of our shared destiny. I am so appreciative to both of you for doing this. For those who are tuning in, you'll see why these conversations are the best part of my job. I get to do them with individuals like you all the time. I get to do them sometimes online. I hope you will join us as we continue the series. And before we sign off, I'm going to come back to Brandon and Jonah one more time. I want you to give us a URL, a platform, a place where people can find you, engage with you, to hear more from you as you're learning in the world. Brandon, where should people find you? And our staff will capture this and put it in the notes as well.
Sure. Please visit us at the hiddengeniusproject.org, at Hidden Genius Pro on socials, and you can find us on LinkedIn and Snapchat and TikTok as well.
And for us, it's Stand for Children, which is stand.org. Highschoolsuccess.org is our Center for High School Success, and greatfirstaid.org is our wonderful curriculum.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Again, everyone, I'm Vilas Dhar, Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. I hope you'll join us for the next of these conversations. Go out and do good in the world. Thank you, everyone.